Book 3, Chapter 10 of the Lancashire Witches. This recording is in the public domain. Reading by Andy Minter. The Lancashire Witches, a Romance of Pendle Forest, by William Harrison Ainsworth. Book 3, Houghton Tower. Chapter 10 Evening Entertainments. Other amusements were reserved for the evening. While revelry was again held in the great hall, while the tables groaned for the third time since morning with good cheer, and the ruby wine, which seemed to gush from inexhaustible fountains, mantled in the silver flagons, while seneschal, sewer, and pantler, with the yeomen of the buttery and the kitchen, were again actively engaged in their vocations, while of the 300 guests more than half, as if insentient, again vied with each other in prowess with the trencher and the goblet, while, in the words of old Taylor, the water poet, but who was no water drinker, and who thus sang of the hospitality of the men of Manchester in the early part of the 17th century, they had roast, boiled, baked, too much, white, claret, sack, nothing they thought too heavy or too hot, can followed can, and pot succeeded pot. During this time, preparations were made for fresh entertainments out of doors. The gardens at Houghton Tower, though necessarily confined in space, owing to their situation on the brow of a hill, were beautifully laid out, and commanded from their ballasted terraces magnificent views of the surrounding country. Below them lay the well wooded park, skirted by the silvery Darwen, with the fair village of Waltonley Dale immediately beyond it, the proud town of Preston farther on, and the single coned Nose Point rising majestically in the distance. The principal garden constituted a square, and was divided, with mathematical precision, according to the formal taste of the time, into smaller squares, with a broad, well kept gravel walk at each angle. These plots were arranged in various figures and devices, such as the cinquefoil, the flower de luce, the trefoil, the lozenge, the fret, the diamond, the crossbow, and the oval, all very elaborate and intricate in design. Besides these knots, as they were termed, there were labyrinths, and clipped yew tree walks, and that indispensable requisite to a garden at the period, a maze. In the centre was a grassy eminence, surmounted by a pavilion, in front of which spread a grass plot of smoothest turf, ordinarily used as a bowling green. At the lower end of this a temporary stage was erected for the masque about to be represented before the King. Torches were kindled, and numerous lamps burned in the branches of the adjoining trees, but they were scarcely needed, for the moon being at the full, the glorious effulgence shed by her upon the scene rendered all other light pale and ineffectual. After supper, at which the drinking was deeper than at dinner, the whole of the revellers repaired to the garden, full of frolic and merriment, and well disposed for any diversion in store for them. The King was conducted to the bowling green by his host, preceded by a crowd of attendants bearing odoriferous torches, but the royal gait being somewhat unsteady, the aid of Sir Gilbert Hoghton's arm was required to keep the monarch from stumbling. The rest of the bacchanalians followed, and, slated as they were, it will not be wondered that they put very little restraint upon themselves, but shouted, sang, danced, and indulged in all sorts of licence. Opposite the stage prepared for the maskers, a platform had been reared, in front of which was a chair for the King, with seats for the nobles and principal guests behind it. The sides were hung with curtains of crimson velvet fringed with gold, the roof decorated like a canopy, so that it had a very magnificent effect. James lolled back in his chair, and jested loudly and rather indecorously with the various personages as they took their places around him. In less than 5 minutes the whole of the green was filled with revellers, and great was the pushing and jostling, the laughing and screaming, that ensued among them. Silence was then enjoined by Sir John Finett, who had stationed himself on the steps of the stage, and at this command the assemblage became comparatively quiet, though now and then a half suppressed titter or a smothered scream would break out. Amid this silence the king's voice could be distinctly heard, and his coarse jests reached the ears of the astonished audience, provoking many a severe comment from the elders, and much secret laughter from the juniors. The masque began. Two tutelar deities appeared on the stage. They were followed by a band of foresters, clad in Lincoln green, with bows at their backs. The first deity wore a white linen tunic, with flesh-coloured hose and red buskins, and had a purple taffeta mantle over his shoulders. In his hand he held a palm branch, and a garland of the same leaves was woven round his brow. The second household god was a big brawny varlet, wild and shaggy in appearance, being clothed in the skins of beasts, with sandals of untanned cowhide. On his head was a garland of oak leaves, and from his neck hung a horn. He was armed with a hunting spear and a wood knife, and attended by a large Lancashire mastiff. Advancing to the front of the stage, the foremost personage thus addressed the monarch: "This day, great king, for government admired, which these thy subjects have so much desired, shall be kept holy in their hearts' best treasures, and vowed to James, as is this month to Caesar. And now the landlord of this ancient tower, thrice fortunate to see this happy hour, whose trembling heart thy presence sets on fire, unto this house, the heart of all our shire, does bid thee cordial welcome, and would speak it in higher notes, but extreme joy doth break it. He makes his guests most welcome. In his eyes love tears do sit, not he that shouts and cries. And we, the antique guardians of this place, I of this house, he of the fruitful chase, since the bold Houghton's from the hill took name, who with the stiff unbridled Saxons came, and so have flourished in this fairer clime, successively from that to this our time, still offering up our immortal powers, sweet incense, wine, and odoriferous flowers, while sacred Vesta in her virgin tire, with vows and wishes tends to hallowed fire. Now, seeing that thy Majesty is thus greater than household deities like us, we render up to thy most powerful guard this tower. This knight is thine, he is thy ward. For by thy helping and auspicious hand, he and his home shall ever, ever stand, and flourish in despite of envious fate, and then live like Augustus fortunate. And long, long mayst thou live, to which both men and guardian angels cry, Amen, Amen." James, who had demeaned himself critically during the delivery of the address, observed at its close to Sir Richard Hoghton, who was standing immediately behind his chair, "We cannot say mickle for the rhymes, which are but indifferently strung together, but the sentiments are real and good, and that is all we care for." On this, the second tutelar divinity advanced, and throwing himself into an attitude, as if bewildered by the august presence in which he stood, exclaimed, "Thou greatest of mortals!" and then stopped, as if utterly confounded. The king looked at him for a moment, and then roared out, "Weel, good man, your commencement is pertinent and true enough, and though we be the greatest of mortals, as ye style us, dinna fash yourself about our grandeur, but go on, as if we were nae better nor wiser than your ain simple sel." But instead of encouraging the dumbfounded deity, this speech completely upset him. He hastily retreated, and in trying to screen himself behind the huntsman, fell back from the stage, and his hound leapt after him. The incident, whether premeditated or not, amused the spectators much more than any speech he could have delivered, and the king joined heartily in the merriment. Silence being again restored, the first divinity came forward once more, and spoke thus: "Dread lord, thy Majesty hath stricken dumb His weaker godhead. If to himself he come, Unto thy servant straight he will commend These foresters, and charge them to attend. Thy